Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Kaf Vav, Nu Mishnah, Nechasim sheyesh lahem acharayut niknin bechesef ubishtad ubechazaka. We're going in a series. We talked about first marriage, acquiring, in some sense, a wife, and then we talked about acquiring Eved, Ivri, Eved Kanani, and so now we're talking about acquiring land and movable items. So, something property that you can be used as a guarantee. That means land. If you're making a loan, so you can. It's a written loan. Then the land can be used as a lien on that property to guarantee the loan. So that's the way the Talmud talks about land. It can be acquired. You can acquire land in three ways: with money transfer, with a contract, or chazakah means possessing, using the land, and that makes it yours. Again, to remember, you probably in most transactions there's going to be some money involved, but we're talking about is when does the actual transfer take place, such that neither party can renege on the deal. So any of these three ways can effectuate the transfer. Whereas things that cannot be used as a guarantee on the loan, meaning movable items, that can only be acquired by pulling. So you see, even if I pay for that vase that you have in your store, still I have not acquired it. Such that if I want to change my mind, or you want to change your mind, or it breaks, if it breaks, it's the seller's responsibility until I, the buyer, actually pick it up, take possession of it in that way. That's what effectuates the transaction, right? So that's very important, that just giving money or shtad will not be effective for movable items. Nechasim sheyesh lam acharayut niknin im nechasim sheyesh lam acharayut bechesef bishtad ubehazaka. This we learn about kinyan agav. Let's say I'm buying both types of things from you. I'm buying your land, and I also want to buy the tractor that's on your farm. So if I do a transaction for the land, that transaction will take effect on the tractor as well. So let's say we do it with kesef, which if I wanted to buy your tractor, kesef alone would not work because that's a movable item. However, if I buy the land with kesef, and I say, included in the sale will also be the tractor, then that gets included as well, and the tractor will be mine. That's kinyan agav, like, by the way, since you're already acquiring land, you can use the same transaction for movable property. And furthermore, they also go together regarding an oath, and now it's actually the other way around, that land will take on itself the law of movable items. So for movable items or money, we have the law of modeh b'miksat. If you come and claim that I owe you 100, and I say, no, I paid you 50, I only owe you 50, so then I have to make a swear that this is the case, that I already paid the 50, and I only have to pay the other 50. That's modeh b'miksat. Modeh b'miksat applies to movable items, and to cash. It does not apply to land. If you come and claim, hey, I owe you 100 acres of land, and I say, no, I already gave you 50, I only have to give you 50. There's no law of modeh b'miksat regarding land. However, let's say the claim is regarding both. You come and say, hey, you owe me this much land and this much money, and I come in and dispute half of it, right? I dispute the property, but I admit that I owe the land, or something like that. So since the law of modeh b'miksat applies in that case to the property part of it, I have to make a swear also on the land part of it. So you see these two laws go together. Regarding acquisition, we can use the type of acquisition for land to cover property also, if it's movable property also, if it's together. And the modeh b'miksat that applies to movable items will apply to land also if the claim includes both of them. Now we go one by one. Each item on this list. Bechesef min nelan. How do you know that land can be acquired with money? Amar Chizkiah Amar Kera Sadot Bakesef Yikanu. Yirmiyah is talking about the future. Even though we're being exiled now, one day we're going to come back to the land, and we will be able to buy fields with money. So he's talking about acquiring back the fields of Israel, and he mentions that it's acquired with money. So we learn from here that money is a possible way to make a transaction on land. The continuation of the pasuk says, and you will write this in contracts and sign it. So if we read the whole pasuk, it sounds like you would need money and also you have to write a contract. So we answer, yeah, you would be right if the word yiknu was all the way at the end. If it said fields are bought with money and by writing a shtad, that's how they are acquired. Then, so the yiknu would go on both, and I would say, yes, you need both steps. But since it says yiknu in the middle, so that we read it as fields will be acquired with money. That's it. Money settles the acquisition. It's already yours. After you do the acquisition, it's a good idea to write a contract and sign it and seal it and have it on hand so that it will be a proof in case there's any dispute later on. Amarav, lo shanu el makom she'en kotvin et hashtar, al makom she'kotvin et hashtar lo kana v'parish parish. Rav says this law that the money acquires a field by itself is only in a place where they are not accustomed to write contracts. Right, in that place, they don't usually write contracts, so that's the biblical law. Money by itself works. You could write a contract also. That also works. But money by itself is fine. However, if you live in a place where the general custom is to write a contract, then, see, it all has to do with the psychology, what the people have in mind. If the seller is expecting, or really the buyer is expecting to have a contract written because he wants to make sure to have proof, well then he's not going to fully have in mind that he should acquire it. The seller also has in mind, since he knows in this place everybody writes contracts, so he's not going to fully give over the ownership of the field until the contract is written. So, everything's based on condition. If everybody in that place, does a certain thing, well, then that's the expectation. So then we assume that the parties did not have full intention to make the transfer until that happened. So even though on a biblical level, money itself can work, and if you're in a place where they don't use contracts, that's fine. The money itself will effectuate the transaction. But if everybody's assuming that we're going to follow up with a contract, well, then they're not agreeing to the transaction until the contract is written. And so in those places, you would need not just money, but also a contract. Parish. However, no matter where you are, if you specify your wishes, then that's fine, right? You say up front, listen, I'm paying you money, but I don't want this to be effectuated until a contract is written, right? So anything that you specify, that's fine, right? You can always put any kind of condition. I don't want this to happen until 30 days from now, or if it should rain. So then it will go by the condition that you set. In fact, Rav Idi bar Rabin would do exactly that. Whenever he would buy land with money, he would say, I get to decide. He would tell the seller, if I want, then the money will effectuate the transaction. And if I decide, the contract will decide. We're going to be doing both, right? Just like today, usually you give a buyer gives a down payment at some point, and then they write up a contract. And so this might not be at the same time. They might do this some days apart. So this is a good question nowadays. Sometimes people, they give a down payment and then they change their mind. Is a down payment binding or not? Well, it's somewhat binding, but a contract is certainly a lot more binding. Okay. So same thing here. If you're in a place where money is used, so then the money would be binding if no contract is usually written there. But if you stipulate and say, I get to decide if it's still going to be the money or the shtar. Now, why would Rav Idi do that? To protect his interests. I can decide that the money that you give me first will effectuate the transaction, such that if you decide to change your mind, I could say no, I accepted the money, and that's it. The land is transferred, so that protects him in case the seller changes his mind. And Rav Idi says, I reserve the right to say that the money will not make the acquisition, but rather only the contract, so that if I change my mind, right, in the meantime, I find something else, or that I like better, then I can say, oh, you know what? Listen, even though I paid the money, but the transaction did not go through yet. Give me my money back because we didn't write a contract, and I decided that I want only the contract to finish the transaction, so it's not finished. So that's fine if ED makes that stipulation up front, and the seller agrees to that. Then that's what happens. So it depends on the situation of the place, custom of the place, and if you make an extra stipulation, then that's what takes effect. But from biblical law, money by itself can effectuate the transaction, or a shtad, which is next, will be shtad minalan ilema mishum dichti v'chatom b'sefer v'chatom v'adim v'amashtadei ba'almahu. If we learn it from the pasuk that we mentioned, you're writing, you should write it in a scroll or in a contract and sign it with witnesses. Well, we already said that could just be a contract that's used for as proof of purchase, not as effectuating the purchase itself. Rather, it's from a different part of that same perek where Yirmiyah is describing that he actually took a deed of purchase when he bought the land from his uncle or cousin, and so he took the contract, and so that is a description of an actual transaction. And it sounds like it says that he does it by the seller giving the contract to the buyer. The buyer in this case is Yirmiyah. Shemuel says an important limitation on this law, that this land transfer by contract alone only works for a gift. But if it's for a sale, then you have to give the money, and you cannot do it only by a document. This would be like if you did it the other way around. Let's say we signed a contract first. Actually, that's what we usually do nowadays. First, we sign a contract, and then sometime later, I'll give you the entire amount. So, according to Shemuel, if it's a sale, then you need the contract and also the transfer of money. The shtad only works in a matana. We challenge Shemuel from a braita. Mativ Rav Hamnuna bishtar kesad ketav lo al niyad ol acheres afal pi she'en bahem shaveh peruta. Sadi mechura lecha, sadi netuna lecha. Harezo mechura untuna. The Braita describes how do you effectuate a transaction of land with a shtar. You write on a piece of paper or on a piece of clay, even though that's not even worth a peruta. That's okay. See, if it's money, it has to be worth at least a peruta, because you're looking at the monetary value of the item you're giving. But a shtar its value is in the words written on it, not on the writing material. So it really doesn't matter, even if the writing material is not worth anything. And you write on it, my field is sold to you, the seller writes, or my field is given to you. You see here that we're talking about both sales and gifts. So Shemuel, you said that a shtar can only effectuate a transaction regarding gifts, but here, and not sales, but here it says the sale goes through and the gift goes through. So here it says that you can use a contract even for a sale. So this is a big challenge. We're going to have two answers. Hu motiv lav, hu mefarek la. Rav Hamnuna asks the question, but he also has an answer. The Baraita is talking about a case where the seller is selling the field because it's not good, it's poor quality, it was flooded, or has disease, problems, and so he wants to offload it as quickly as possible. And he doesn't want to wait any time, because otherwise the buyer might say, oh, it's not a really good field, I realize now, and I don't want it anymore. Since, in this case, it's almost like a gift, right? Now, it's not a gift because he is taking money for it, but he's desperate to get rid of it. And so the seller has in mind, I am giving over the transfer of this land just with the shtad. I don't want to wait for the money. And that's why it is effective. In a usual case, however, where he's not desperate to get rid of his land, so then the seller will have in mind, listen, I'm writing the contract now, but obviously I don't really have in mind, I don't really give ownership over until I get the money, right? That's when he'll feel like, oh, I got the money. Okay, now he agrees to transfer it. So we can figure out the Braita is talking about a more limited case, and Shemuel is saved. Rav Shema b'matana bikesh litana lo v'lama katav lo lashon mecher kedei le'apot et koho. Rav Ashi says this Braita is actually only talking about a case of a gift. And even though it says Sadi mechura lecha, he wrote that in the contract. I'm selling this to you, even though actually he didn't receive any money. See, it makes sense if they're to say that a shtar works alone when it's a gift, because then there is no transfer of money. So what are you going to wait for? And in this case, even though it was a gift and didn't actually receive any money, nevertheless, he might write this is a gift, but he may write this is a sale. Why would he write this is a sale? He could write it in order to make the gift even better, to enhance the power of the receiver. Here's the law regarding sales and gifts. If I have a piece of land and I have a lien on it, right, a prior lien, because I used it as a guarantee for a loan. And now, if I give it to you as a gift, and then the lien holder comes to collect the loan and I don't have money, he can go after the gift, after that gift of land, take the land that I gave you, and you do not have recourse to recollect it from me, because I gave it to you as a gift in the first place. So then you'll be totally out. So getting a gift of land, you never know, will it be taken or not, and you won't be able to get it back. Whereas if it's a sale, and the buyer has more power. He's paid for it, so he has a right. If the lien holder comes and takes the land, then the buyer has a right to go to the seller and say, hey, my land was taken by the lien holder. You have to give me other land to replace it or pay me for it. And so you have more power. So in this case, I want to give you a gift, and I want the gift to be a really nice gift and give you peace of mind that it won't just be taken without recourse. And so I write in the document that it's a sale, which is in a way, I'm giving you not only this gift of land, but I'm giving you a guarantee on it in case it ever is taken. But in fact, it was talking about a gift. And so this is another way to explain that the Braita only applies to a gift, and Shemuel is again saved. How do you know that Hazakah works? Meaning using that land. To use the land, you might dig in it or close the gate, right? Do some act that shows ownership. And how do you know that works? Back to Yirmiyah, that says you will dwell in your cities that you have taken. So we have a double language here, right? Why do you have to say both? And dwell in the cities that you took. How did you take them? By dwelling in them, using them as an owner. That's what effectuates the transaction. Or an alternate derivation from the Torah itself. It's interesting, we've been using Pesukim from Yirmiyah this whole time that are not actually in the Torah. We don't usually learn Deoraita laws from Nevi'im. In this case, you could say that we're not actually learning the law, but we're just, the Yirmiyah is revealing how they did it. So since it's descriptive, so we can use that description to fill in how land should be acquired. It's not like Yirmiyah is saying a new law. Everybody, you must do this on Tuesdays. But it's just describing how a law that we already know is on the books. We're just describing the details of how it works. Anyway, here we have a pasuk from Yirmiyah that says, "You shall possess it and dwell in the land." Well, why also the double language? How do you possess it? By dwelling there. So again, it's the dwelling there, the usage of the land. That is what will effectuate the transaction, so that we can totally agree. Hey, this land is mine, but it's not mine until I go and use it. That's one of the three ways to acquire it. So here in the context of Eved, of Avadim, and land that can be acquired and ransomed, it says in the middle of that, and if you should sell an item to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand. So in the simple reading, it just means buying from him. It's like on hand is a usual expression. But the Midrash is saying kano miyad. There must be some things that are acquired with a hand, meaning physically to pull the item. Obviously, that's not land because you can't pull land. So this must be talking about movable items. So if it's a movable item, then you have to actually take physical possession of it by pulling it. Rabbi Yochanan de'amar devar Torah ma'ot konot ma'ika lememar Tana takanta d'Rabbanan kataneh. There's machloket elsewhere between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish about this, about the fact that they agree that Mishicha works, but the question is on the deoraita level, can money work? And Rabbi Yochanan says that on the Doraita, yes, Doraita level, money can effectuate transfer not only of land but also of movable items. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, how come money is not listed in the Mishnah? And the answer is the author of the Mishnah put in the rabbinic ordinance because that's the accepted practice. And the rabbi said that even though on the Doraita level you can use money, it's a good idea to not use that and only use Mishicha, because then that will resolve disputes. It's not clear, I paid the money, then it broke, then I changed my mind. But once you actually pull it, that's what effectuates the transaction. And so the rabbis required, in fact, using Mishicha, and did not permit using money anymore. And so that's why the Mishnah is not telling us the original Doraita law, but rather the current practice, which is the Rabbanan law. We next come to the following part of the Mishnah that about Kinyan Agav, you can acquire movable items if at the same time you're acquiring land, and you can use the acquisitions of land, Kesef Shtar and Hazakah, and then you'll get the movable items too. What's the source for Kinyan Agav? Amar Chizkiah Damar Kerav Vayiten lahem abihem matanot vegomer im are mesurot bihuda. It comes from the following pasuk regarding one of the Judean kings who gave to his kids lots of gifts, matanot, and it continues and says silver and gold and precious things. Let's talk about movable items. And he gave it to them as gifts and says im, together with, meaning alongside, Agav, the fortified cities in Judea. So that shows that the main way that he transferred it is with the land, as he did a land transfer, and together with that, alongside Kinyan Agav, he gave the movable items too. All right, so we accept that proof, and now we have a question that we will continue with until the rest of the daf and even until tomorrow. Do the movable items have to be piled on the land or not? I gave the example before of a tractor that's on the land, and that would be easier to do because I'm giving you the land and then the tractor's on it also. So it makes sense you get the whole thing in one package deal. But what if it's not so? What if I'm giving you some piece of land and also I want to include the car that's on the street, right? If the car's in the driveway on that land, that would make more sense. I'm giving you the land and the car. But if the car is not there, right? The car is somewhere else, and can I say that I'm including here? I'm giving you this land, but I also want to include that car, some cash in my pocket, right? Some vase I have in some other house. Can I include movable items that are not piled on the land? Good question. We're going to see 3 or 4 attempted proofs today that are all not going to be successful. First one, Amar Rav Yosef, Tashema, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Karka kol shehu chayevet bepe'ah ubebikurim. So Rabbi Akiva says, and this Mishnah and Pe'ah, that even if you have a small, tiny little piece of land, you still have to give a corner of that land. I don't know, whatever grows on it, right? A few stalks, you still have to leave a corner for the poor. And Bikurim, you also have to give from the first fruit. Even though it's a very tiny land and it's not producing much, you have to give some Bikurim. Lichtov aleha piros bol, in order to write a piros bol, to protect, if I have outstanding loans, and I want to make sure that they continue even through Shvi'it, does not cancel them, I have to write a piros bol. And part of the way piros bol works is that you need land in order to write one. So you have to own land. And it doesn't matter how much land, even a tiny bit of land. When we were students in yeshiva, it was a shemitah year, and none of us owned land. We were just students, and we wanted to write Piros Bol because we were learning all about it, and we wanted to actually do it. And so I remember our teacher in yeshiva in Israel gave us all a tiny piece of land, just a tiny, smallest piece. He set aside a little corner, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, and we all took 1,000th piece of that land, and that way we have that land and we could write a Piros Bol. I assume that I still own that little tiny piece of land. I should go back there and find it. and reclaim it. Okay, so that's all you need is a little bit of piece of land. Any land ownership, you can write a Pirus Bol. And here's what we need: v'liknot iman nechasim she'en lahem achadayut. And even the tiniest piece of land you can use for kinyan agav, and say, here, I'm selling you this tiny little 1 millimeter squared piece of land, and through that I also want to sell you this car and this money and all kinds of other things. That works. So here's the proof. If you say that everything has to be piled onto the land, this tiny piece of land, what is it good for? I can't fit a car. I can't fit anything on a piece of land. I can't even fit a few coins on that piece of land. And so obviously, Kinyan Agav works even if the movable items are not on the land. Sounds like a pretty good proof, but Targuma Rav Shemuel bar Bisna Kamed Rav Yosef Kegon Shenaas Ba Machat. Oh, good answer. Rav Shemuel says, oh wait, even a tiny piece of land, it's bigger than a needle, right? You can stick a needle into the land and say, here, I am selling you this land, and agav, the needle also. See, so even a tiny piece of land is good to hold a needle. Amar le Rav Yosef, kabastan, ichpal tana lashmuinan machat. So Rav Yosef said, you disgust me. You're wasting our time. You think that Tana of the Mishnah is going to include this clause to teach me this one possible case of selling a needle? How often is this going to happen that you need to sell a needle with Kinyan Agav? Right? This is silly. What a silly answer. Amar Rav Asher, man le malan de la Tana ba marganita de shavya alfe zuzeh. Rav Asher defends this proof, defends the answer rather, that it's not a proof. It defends Rav Shemuel and says, wait a second, even if it's only a needle, that needle's not worth much, but you can hang on the needle a pearl that's worth 1,000 dinar. And so, yes, you may very well take a tiny piece of land and you don't want to pull it for some reason, but with Meshicha, but instead you want to use kesef or shtar or chazakah. And so maybe I'll give you this tiny piece of land and put a little needle on it and hang a pearl on it. So, yes, there could be a case where you would do that, and yes, it's worth the Tana adding in this law to teach us this concept that that you can put something on the land even if it's a tiny bit. And so therefore it could be talking about a case of piling something valuable even on a tiny piece of land, and therefore there is no proof from here that that Kinyan Agav can work even if the movable item is not on the land. And so we try a second proof. Tashema Amar Rabbi Elazar, Masebe Madoni, Echad Shaya B'Yerushalayim. This Madoni man who was in Jerusalem. Shayu lo metaltelin harbel b'keshli tana b'matana. He had a lot of movable items and he wanted to give them as a gift. And so how's he going to transfer all these things? He's ill. He didn't have time to go and pull every sheep and every item that he had. He wants to sell it and give it as a gift immediately before he doesn't get the chance to do it anymore. So the sages told him, here's good advice. You use kinyan agav. And that way, you don't have to pull every item. You could just do a transfer of money or shtar or chazakah with the land, and you'll include all the movable items. So me'asa halach v'lakach bet sela samuch liYerushalayim. He went and acquired a piece of land called Bet Sela. And we're assuming now that means a piece of land the size of a sela. Sela can mean a coin. It can also mean a rock. Right now we're assuming it means a coin. He took a little tiny piece of land. Ve'amar sefoni ze lifloni ve'imo me'ason u'me'a chaviyot umet ve'kiyemu et devarav. And he went and said, the north portion of this little piece of land I am giving as a gift to that person. And no one cares about that little piece of land anyway. But he's using it only as agav, and together with it 100 sheep and 100 barrels. Obviously 100 sheep and 100 barrels aren't going to fit on that little tiny piece of land, and yet this is what he did, and the rabbis advised him to do so, and the rabbis fulfilled his statement, and they gave the gifts. So there you go. This seems to be a very good proof that you can do kinyan agav for movable items on land, even if the movable items are not piled up on the land. However, not a good proof. This is part of the proof. If you say that they have to be piled on the land, well, bet selah, how much can you fit on a bet selah? Certainly not that. But we reject the proof. Mi sevarat bet selah selah mamash, my selah de nafish tuba, v'may karule selah de kashe kasela. Wait, did you think bet selah means something about the size? That's the size of a coin? No, we're talking about something that's actually very big, a very big piece of land that could hold everything. So why'd you call it a selah? Selah in the sense of a rock, that this land was hard as a rock. Therefore, it was very cheap. Nobody would want to buy the land. You can't grow anything on it. But it was good for him because he just needed some empty space to put all his movable stuff on so that he could do kinyan agav. And so it's actually not so clear, not beyond proof, that this case is talking about a small piece of land. It could be talking about a big piece of land. And so again, we have no proof that kinyan agav can work if the movable items are not on the land. That brings us to the third proof that we will offer, but will also be unsuccessful. This will be the end of the daf today. Tomorrow we'll see some more proofs. And this one starts, Tashem Adam Arav Yehuda Amarav, Maaseh be'adam echad shechala b'Yerushalayim ke Rabbi Eliezer, v'amri la bari haya kerabanan. So there was a man in Jerusalem. There's two interpretations, whether he was sick or healthy. According to Rabbanan, he was healthy, and therefore he wanted to give away a lot of money, and therefore he needs to do a proper transaction. According to Rabbanan, if he was sick on his deathbed, then even an oral statement would serve as a transaction. That's the opinion of Rabbanan. So according to Rabbanan, we have to assume he was healthy. There's machloket about this, about the shechiv merah, because Rabbi Eliezer says even someone on his deathbed has to use the regular legal means of transaction. An oral statement is not sufficient. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, it could be talking about a healthy person or a person on his deathbed. It doesn't matter. The point is we're talking about a person who needs to unload a lot of property that he has. He wants to give it away as a present. He needs to do it quickly for whatever reason. Maybe he's on his deathbed, or maybe not. And he needs an easy way to do this, and he can't do it orally. He needs a proper method of transaction. He had a lot of stuff, and he wanted to give it away quickly as a gift. And the problem is that the Mishnah said, for movable items, it's only mishicha, and to go and to give away something, and the recipient will have to go and pull on every item, will take forever. Maybe they're in different places, very difficult to do. So he goes to the rabbis, and the only way to do it is kinyan agav, upon land. So that's what he did. So he went and bought a bet rova near Jerusalem. Bet rova, not very big, 24 square meters. So a relatively small piece of land, and he said, he didn't even give away that whole piece of land. He just said, this particular square tefach, right? That's it, just about 3 or 4 inches squared. I am giving as a gift to my friend Piloni, and together with it 100 sheep and 100 barrels of whatever, oil or wine. And umet, and then he died. Well, if he was on his deathbed, it makes sense that he died. If he was not on his deathbed, he just suddenly died. So either way, he wasn't around to do anything else. And the case came to the Chachamim, and they said, oh, he did a kinyan agav. That works. That's totally fine. Now, let's analyze the case. If you think that all of the movable property has to be piled onto the land in order for kinyan agav to work, well, how much can you fit on one square handbreadth, right? Not any animals or barrels. And so obviously this is a proof that kinyan agav works even though the property is not on the land itself but is somewhere else. So it seems like a good proof. But we answer, no, we're not talking about that he actually had 100 sheep and 100 barrels. He had a lot of money, the amount of money that would be worth 100 sheep and 100 barrels. But actually it was coins, and 1 tefach by 1 tefach, it's a small area, but you could fit a lot of coins on there, right? You just take some gold coins, pile them up, or put them in a bag or something, and you can transfer it that way. He was transferring money. So it's not necessarily proof, because you're right, well, it could be money. And don't think I'm just telling you some strange thing just to get out of this proof. It actually makes sense that it was cash. If it was actually sheep and barrels, there is another form of transaction that we haven't mentioned yet, which is chalipin. I haven't mentioned here in this Mishnah. A symbolic exchange. Chalipin works for land. It also works for movable items. I can give you a handkerchief, and you, by accepting that handkerchief, you give over, you transfer ownership of any movable item, no matter where it is. And so when he came to the rabbis and said, I have a lot of things to transfer, what should I do? And they told him, the only way is with land, with agav. Why didn't they say chalipin? It must be because it's cash. Chalipin works for land, it works for movable items. Chalipin does not work for cash. And that's why they didn't tell him chalipin, and instead said only agav. Kinyan agav does work for coins. And so this is actually a proof. If it was actual sheep and barrels, they could have said, do kinyan chalipin. So therefore, it makes sense. In fact, it was cash, and you can fit cash. So therefore, it could be that you have to put, for kinyan agav, all of the items on the land itself. Now we have, say, a difficulty. Wait a second. If you're talking about cash, well, then you could do the regular meshicha. It's very easy to just acquire it. Right? This guy from Jerusalem, he had a lot of cash. He wanted to give it to Ploni. Just go to Ploni and say, here, I want to give you a gift, this bag of money. You get, give it to him, and the guy will pull it. And then he takes it. So what was the problem? Why do you have a big issue and say, you can only do it with kinyan agav? A good question. Rather, must be that the recipient was not around. He was in a different city. He was far away. So the giver wants to give it to him right now for whatever time pressure he was under, and he wasn't around. So he went to the rabbis and said, how can I give it to him without meshicha? So they told him, they couldn't tell him chalipin because it was cash. Rather, they told him, do kinyan agav. Okay, so now we're left without a proof. But then we say, hold on, hachinami deletel mekabel matana. Oh no, if he's not around, then that could explain why they didn't say chalipin. In fact, it could be that they were real sheep and real barrels, because that's what it says. It's really difficult to read that in and say he wanted to give sheep and barrels. No, he wanted to give $1 million. That's equivalent to sheep and barrels. No, it sounds like he actually sheep and barrels. And once you admit that he couldn't do meshicha because he was far away, so once he's far away, that's why he can't do chalipin. Chalipin also has to be transfer the handkerchief directly. And so that's why it was, in fact, sheep and barrels, and he couldn't do chalipin because he was far away, and that's why he had to do kinyan agav, and therefore this would be a proof that kinyan chalipin can be even without the items there. At this point, we have two possible readings of the story. It could be the way that we ended up with over here, that it was actually real sheep, and he still couldn't do chalipin because he was far away. So the only way would be to do agav, but it's a small piece of land, so this would be a good proof that you can do agav when the things aren't there. Incidentally, these few words here are not found in one or two manuscripts, and some Rishonim don't have it. But I'm going to read it as being an authentic part of the Talmud, because it is in most manuscripts. So that is one option according to which it would be a good proof. But we still have not ruled out the other option that we're talking about cash. And because it's cash, you could not do chalipin. And he also couldn't do meshicha. I mean, meshicha is an easy thing to do with cash because you just pull it, because he also was away. And that is a plausible reading. And therefore, there is no proof because that's a possible reading. So now we still want to try to remove that option, that reading, and then if we could remove that it was cash, then we would have a plausible reading. So we follow up with a question about it being cash. If the giver wants to give away cash, he can't do chalipin no matter what. and he can't do meshicha because the recipient is away. But here's what the gift giver can do. He can get anybody else and tell them, here, can you take this on behalf of the recipient? Right? Zachin la'adam shelo befanav. And therefore, if I give you something and I say, here, take this, pull it, with Meshicha, and you're taking it not for yourself, but on behalf of that person, that would work. And so why is there no other way of doing it, right? Isn't it evident from this that we're not talking about cash, we're talking about actual items? That would be difficult for anyone, the recipient or anyone else, to go and pull all those hundreds of items. So this is a good proof that it's not cash, and therefore it is cattle, and therefore we do have an answer, but we say no, he didn't want to rely on someone else. He didn't trust him. He had this $1 million in coins, and he didn't trust that. If he feared that if he gave it to someone else, here, can you pull on this, seize, take this $1 million on behalf of that person? The guy will just take it and said, what'd you say about the other person? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you gave it to me as a gift. Thank you very much. And he'll go and use it and spend it. So it was too valuable. He didn't trust anyone, and that's why he didn't want to rely on anyone else. But it could very well be that it is cash. And so once again, he couldn't give it as a gift directly with Meshicha because the guy was away. He can't do Chalipin, first of all, because he was away, and Chalipin doesn't work with cash. And he couldn't give it to anybody else because he doesn't trust anybody else. And that's why he had to do Kinyan Agav. And it was a lot of money, but it can fit on one square thing. So therefore, it's possible. There's no proof that Agav works. If something is not on the land, it could be that this case was that it was coins on the land. A last clarification: how would you explain, according to this reading, Be'elamai en lo takana? En lo takana sounds like there's no possible legal remedy. The only way to do it is kinyan agav. It should have said, well, there is another legal remedy. He just didn't want to do it by giving it to someone else to pull on it. So we explain, Hachika Amar, here's what the sentence means. Considering the fact that he did not trust anybody else and therefore could not use Mishicha with a third party, so there was no other possible way. Chalipin can't work with cash. And the guy was away anyway, so couldn't do Chalipin and couldn't do Meshicha with him, and therefore there was no other possibility of transferring the cash except if you put it, stack it up on a small piece of a tefach by tefach land. Since this is a possible reading, whether it's plausible or not is a good question, but it's a possible reading, so there is no absolute proof that Kinyan Agav can work when the movable items are not on the land. So far, 3 proofs without a conclusive clarification. We will look forward to more proofs tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.